Welcome to the Crossing Church. This is the version of the Crossing that goes where you go and delivers what you need. Fresh perspectives on faith and Jesus with practical, real-life next steps built in. This is your place to explore faith and experience the life-changing ways of Jesus.
Hey, let me set up this week like this. I've lived for the last 41 years of my life in Orange County, California. We all know it's the home of Disneyland. For 30 years of the 41 years, I've lived in Costa Mesa, California, where the Crossing Church exists. And I actually continue to live in Costa Mesa. And for my years as the founding and senior pastor of the Crossing Church, I gotta tell y'all, friends, I very rarely traveled. Sure, once in a while I did, but the reality is, traveling to the point where I was on an airplane a whole bunch, I didn't do it all that much. But now, in my role with an organization called Stadia Church Planting, see, Stadia is an organization that serves men and women who start brand new churches, kind of like the Crossing Church was 35 years ago. And I handed off this church, the Crossing Church, to an amazing young man, Andrew Brownback. And by the way, Andrew is truly amazing. In fact, I got to tell you all this. He paid for my lunch for the very first time 2 Thursdays ago. Just wanted you all to know that. His leadership, though, is so cool because he is guiding this church in ways that are better and brighter than I ever could have done during my 30-year tenure. However, since handing off this church over to his leadership, I now have the privilege of serving young men and women who were like me when I planted or started the Crossing Church. And since Stadia is a United States-wide organization, I actually serve church planters in every place in every part of our country. So what that means is I'm on a lot of planes these days. And one of the best things about where I live is the airport is only like 7, maybe 10 minutes from my home. The call letters from Orange County Airport is SNA. And I think most of us know who live here that Orange County Airport is also called what? Type it in the chat. That's right, John Wayne Airport. And for some of you who are a bit younger, you may not realize this, the airport is actually named for a real dude. I mean, John Wayne went to USC. John Wayne had a home on Newport Bay. He had a boat that is still in the harbor today called Wild Goose. And John Wayne was also a movie star. How many of you have heard of John Wayne? Put a thumbs up in the chat. How many of you have watched a John Wayne movie? Put thumbs up in the chat. So we're clear? John Wayne was like the Vin Diesel or the Dwayne Rock Johnson of his day. And John Wayne had some of these quotes from some of his movies that were so cool. One of them was, "Life is tough, but it's tougher when you're stupid." I like that. Life is tough, but it's tougher when you're stupid. And my prayer for us today is that we won't be stupid, that we'll wisely learn to incorporate this much needed character trait that we're going to look at today into our lives. A character trait, by the way, that sets us up for real success in life. And this gets at another quote from one of John Wayne's movies. It's from the only movie he actually won his Oscar for in 1969. The movie is titled True Grit. There's a point in the movie where a 14-year-old kid says to John Wayne's character, "Sir, they tell me you're a man with true grit." And that's the topic of the message today. The topic is of true grit. And I gotta tell you right now, I'm not the smartest man on the planet, yet I'm gonna tell you right now, the character trait I prize more than any other is grit. I'd love it to be said of me, "Hey Tim, they tell me you're a man of grit, true grit." And for all of you who are listening to me today, that's my prayer for you on this day as well, that a whole lot of people would say about you, "She's a woman of grit, true grit. You're a man of grit, true grit." See, dictionary.com defines true grit as firmness of character, an indomitable spirit. And indomitable means strong, resolute. There was a book that was like all the rage a few years back. The title was Grit, the Power and Passion of Perseverance. There's a woman that wrote it. Her name is Angela Duckworth. And she actually had a TED Talk that was one of the most popular of all time. And Angela Duckworth says, and I quote, "After studying people, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success." Now, just write in the chat, Just put this, okay? Here's the question. How many of you would like to be successful? If you want to be successful, put that successful in the chat. Successful in marriage, successful in parenting, successful in your finances, success in your relationship with Jesus. I want success for every one of you. And I know that's what you want for yourself. So Duckworth says one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It's grit. Now, it's been said that you don't determine a person's greatness by their wealth, their education, or their talent. You determine a person's greatness by what it takes to stop them. And when I started the Crossing Church in the fall of 1988, there were no books on church planning. There were no DVD sets or cassettes or VHS tapes on the topic. In fact, I'll tell you right now, friends, the story of how we launched the Crossing would make you cringe. And if you knew the story, you'd immediately question, Tim, how in the world is it that the church you launched even survived? After all, we didn't even launch in a growing component or quadrant of Orange County. But I tell people all the time, as I look back, I always say, along with the Spirit and the power of God, there were a handful of women and men who had grit, like Terry Lee and Even Stevenson, Dan and Eva Stewart, Brett and Patrick Detkin, Rob and Debbie Collette, Dale and Dawn Winson, Nicole and Jared Romero. In fact, Nicole is one of the teaching pastors at the Crossing Church. What you all don't realize is she started at this church when she was in high school, at a high school in the Newport Mesa School District, Estancia. See, we all were just stubborn and determined enough to follow a passionate pursuit. We were on a mission for God. And many of us stayed together for 20, 23, 25, 27. And in Nicole's case, she's still here. All these years later, she looks like she's 18 and she's only 35, okay? I can't believe it. But see, here's the deal. We would not quit. We had grit. Hey, those of you know me, you know I'm not all that smart. In fact, the names that I just mentioned, none of them even went to a Bible college or like a seminary or anything like that. We were just stubborn enough to firmly believe in a big God. We had this attitude of this dude. His name is Paul. In fact, listen to this. He wrote these words to a location, like the Crossing is in Costa Mesa, California. He wrote these words to a city in the Greek part of the world, the Mediterranean, in a city called Corinth. And so it was a letter, and we see it in the Bible now in letter, chapter and verse. In 2 Corinthians in chapter 4 says, we are pressed on every side by troubles. We're not crushed and broken. We are perplexed, but we don't give up and quit. We are hunted down, but God never abandons us. We get knocked down, but we get up again, and we keep going. See, there are the people who have this ability to stay at it, to never quit, to keep on keeping on. They've got grit, persistence, determination, perseverance. It's grit. It doesn't matter what you call it. What we're talking about is the ability to stick to something. It's grit. And when you look at the all-stars in the Bible, you discover that they're just ordinary people with an extraordinary amount of determination. They simply don't know how to quit. They had grit. It's like that old statement you may have heard when you were in school, when you were a kid: quitters never win and winners never quit. So let me just ask you, do you have grit? Do you finish things you start? Like if this was a multiple choice test and I said usually, always, sometimes, never, do you finish things you start? Do you find it easy to get discouraged? Usually, always, sometimes, never. Put it in the chat. Would people say you have the ability to hang in there? Here's a pointed question as you look back over your life. What is it you wished that you'd never given up on? Like, I wished I'd never given up on school. I wish I'd never quit those piano lessons. I wished I'd never quit that promising career. I wish I'd never quit on that relationship. I'm telling you right now, there's a huge cost to quitting. Now, Andrew just got done, as a church, we got done looking at this series called Legacy. People who have developed a legacy, particularly a positive, character-infused legacy, they are people that in the moment don't do the convenient, expedient, easy thing to do. No, they realize that there is a cost to giving up, to not having grit. We all know it's not so important how you start the race of life that counts. You want to have a legacy? It's how you finish up. And quite possibly the best definition of grit is this. Grit is doing what you don't want to do. Now, I got to be honest, I'm not sure what you know about Jesus. But I'm going to tell you right now, there was a time that he knew he was actually going to be murdered. And even in that moment, he said to his dad, hey, if it's possible, can we not have that happen? See, grit is doing what you don't want to do to be what you want to be. We're glad that Jesus went through what he went through for us. So here's the question today. What does it take to have grit? A few things that I want to share with you. And let me give you the first one. First, grit is the ability to display a terrier-like tenacity. Now, why do I use that wording? Okay? I remember when I was a little kid, there was this dog that I was extremely fearful, terrified, afraid of. This dog was tiny. It was like a terrier or something. I mean, it had this mean face, hair that would hang down over its eyes, made that dog look foreboding. It looked scary. And this little dog was something else. This dog had visions of grandeur. I think the dog thought it was like a pit bull or maybe a Doberman. But when that dog would get something in its mouth, he displayed excessive tenacity. If that dog had something in its mouth, my friend whose dog it was, we would put something in its mouth and you could not make that dog let it go. He would tenaciously grip us in his mouth and he'd growl. And we would have fun playing with him, swinging him around and around and around. But the dog never let it go. And I found this about terriers. Look at this, okay, on the screen. Terriers are a group of dogs, and these dogs have some common traits, including the fact that they're almost always tenacious at whatever task life has handed them. In other words, those dogs have grit. God says this about tenacity. Hebrews 10:36. You need to persevere so that when you've done the will of God, you will receive what God has promised. Now, I looked up the meaning of persevere, and this is what it said. In the New Testament, it's the characteristics of a person who's not swerved. They're steadfast. Like that word, I like that word. It's not a word you hear about. Who's not swerved from his or her deliberate purpose and loyalty to faith by even the greatest of trials and sufferings. See, let me just pause right there. Trials and sufferings oftentimes cause us as humans to let go of whatever it is we're holding on to. But why should a person develop terrier-like tenacity? The answer is found in Galatians 6:9. It says, and let us not lose heart and grow weary and faint in acting nobly and doing right. Because in due time, at the appointed season, we shall reap if we do not loosen. Did you see it? If we do not loosen and relax our courage and faint or quit or give up. Our family was in the Pacific Northwest recently. We were there. We visited the Boeing Air Museum. And if you're ever up there, it's a fascinating place. And one of the exhibits had a few plaques about a woman aviator called Amelia Earhart. Now, you may not know who she is or anything about her, but she's a fascinating and gritty character. And one of the quotes on one of the plaques that was listed from Amelia up there in the Northwest, it said this: the most difficult thing in life is the decision to act. Just stop right there. That was what Andrew talked about in the very first week of the Legacy series, because minor decisions have major implications. See, the most difficult thing in life is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity. To do life well, marriage well, parenting well, finances well, your friendships well, your work well. You got to be someone with terrier-like tenacity. You latch on something and you just don't let it go. Now, the second thing that's important for grittiness, grit is demonstrated by the ability to be a finisher. I wonder how many of you have ever started a project, an assignment, or your job with like a burst of enthusiasm, only to be slowed down by an obstacle, hurdle, or difficulty, and then ultimately you were stopped short of your goal because you kept running into obstacles, or you kept running into hurdles, or you kept running into difficulties. Hey, I'll tell you right now, if you haven't read a book called Great by Choice, it's a must read. The key is what the author Jim Collins calls the 20-mile march. It says this, and I quote, "The strength of a person's character, their grit and drive to success, is determined by whether or not they can finish what they started, no matter the hurdles, obstacles, and or challenges." You talk about the ultimate finisher, no matter the obstacles. Friends, that's Jesus. And Jesus says in John chapter 4, he says it this way, "My nourishment comes from doing the will of God and from," look at it, "finishing his work." Jesus was a finisher, not a quitter. And when I think of point two, I scroll back through my life, and there's a story that comes to my mind. I was 15, 16 years of age. I was on the high school baseball team. I had been on a baseball team or some sort of team like that since I was in third grade. I was on multiple all-star teams. I was on a travel baseball team. In fact, the travel team coach was my high school coach. He actually recruited me. He told me the entire time I was the best catcher he had ever had. And he said those things to me for like 4 years running. Well, then my junior year of high school, all of a sudden, I found myself for the very first time, and I'm not kidding you right now, for the very first time, my name wasn't on the lineup card. When the game started, there I was on the bench. And just so we're clear, you might think I'm exaggerating. I never sat on the bench in any sport. I got moved up to first string varsity football when I was a freshman in high school. That's Ohio football, friends. That's better than California football, I'm just saying. So for my freshman year, I'm the starter in football. Wrestling my freshman year, I beat out a senior for the starting lineup. Then baseball, as a freshman, I'm the starting catcher. And that streak continued, football, wrestling, baseball, until the fourth game of my junior year. Now I'm sitting on the bench. Then the next game came around. Same thing, name not on the lineup card. I got frustrated, and I did something that up until that point in my life was absolutely, totally, completely unthinkable. I quit. I didn't finish. That's right, I quit the team. And my dad said that I'd regret that decision. And he was right. And he said something when he sat me down and talked about it that I've never, ever forgotten. When you quit something, whatever that something is, it's always easier to quit the next time. I've never forgotten those words. When you quit something, whatever that something is, it's always easier to quit the next time. And you know what's interesting to me? In the United States of America, we have a unique society, don't we? It's almost like we applaud people who quit things. Our culture is geared up for it. Most people these days, they'd rather bail out than blast through. A lot of people would rather leave than last. That's why Andrew's series on legacy, to me, you've got to go back and listen to that. Andrew did 3 of the messages. Michelle did 1 of them. And the whole idea there is they said, you got to keep on keeping on. So many of us would rather throw in the towel than stay in the game. Grit is the ability to endure, the ability to keep on keeping on. What is grit? Grit's not stopping. It's not quitting. It's not giving up. And a man named Paul, again, I told you before, he wrote these letters, and we see him now as chapter and verse in a book called the Bible. Well, in a letter he wrote to a protege, if you will, a mentee. He was the mentor. He was the coach, if you will. In 2 Timothy, the young man's name was Timothy, in chapter 4, verse 7, he says, I fought the good fight, worthy, honorable, noble fight, and I've finished the race. I've kept firmly held the faith. There it is again, that idea of keeping firm in your grasp. Everything like a terrier, like tenaciousness. That's first, because that's what it leads to finishing, grit. So I got to ask you something. Do you have it? I didn't say talent. Talent's overrated. Gritty people are successful people in their marriages, in their finances, in their health, in their relationships. Let me give you the third and the closing one. Grit is the ability to exercise emotional control over negative emotions. See, here's the reality. A person with true grit never gives into the list of the following emotions. And before I list them, let me explain. There's a difference between being attacked by these things and allowing them to stop you. What are those emotions? They're discouragement, anxiety, and fear. Discouragement is that feeling that occurs when somebody doesn't do what they promised to do, or things are not going the way you thought they'd go, or somebody betrays you, or somebody talks smack about you, they slander you, gossip about you. Well, Deuteronomy 31:8, it offers some great advice. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Hey, don't be afraid and do not be discouraged. See, here's what I've noticed about negative emotions when you have them in relationships or in circumstances of life. The progression begins with discouragement. And then once discouragement sets in, not far from it is anxiety or worry. And then once anxiety or worry come in, it leads to fear. And then fear builds and builds and builds. But I'll tell you right now, fear isn't from God. Because again, that guy who wrote that letter to his protege Timothy tells him this. He says, "For God did not give us a spirit of timidity," which means of cowardice or cringing or fawning fear. Another John Wayne quote on this topic of fear, I like it. It says, "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." Another person says it this way, and it's one of my best famous quotes of all time. Get this, friends. "Fear is wetting your pants. Courage is doing what you're supposed to do with wet pants." I like that. So the progression of the devil is discouragement, anxiety, and once fear sets in, what often happens is, as human beings, we become paralyzed. And the only person that wins is the devil, because now you're wrecked. You stop, you quit, there's no grit. But someone with grit has the ability to exercise, this is emotional control over negative emotions, and then last, grit is the ability to choose into the power of an optimistic outlook. Here's the deal, friends. You and I choose whether or not we're going to be optimistic. You choose whether you're going to allow rejection or setbacks or temporary failures to sour you or control you or push you into retreat. Okay, this is a story about twin 6-year-old boys. Each of the boys had developed extreme personalities that worried their parents, okay? Remember, they're twins. One of the twins was a total optimist, happy, giggling all the time. The other twin was a total pessimist, crying, whining about everything. Now, the parents were so concerned about the difference between these two kids' behavior, they took them to a psychiatrist. So the psychiatrist treated the pessimist this way because he was trying to change his outlook. The psychiatrist took him into a room filled with brand new toys. But instead of being filled with excitement, the little 6-year-old burst into tears. and the psychiatrist asked him, because he was baffled by his response, like, "What's the matter? Don't you want to play with any of these brand new toys?" And the kid is just crying, sobbing, saying, "Yeah, but if I did, I'd only break them." So the psychiatrist, working with the extreme optimistic 6-year-old, he's trying to dampen his outlook because all he sees is blue sky, right? Partly sunny, not partly cloudy. He took him into a room filled with horse poop, okay? Here's what happened. Instead of holding his nose in disgust, get this. This optimistic kid actually squealed with excitement. That's how he thought the pessimistic brother would respond in a room filled with brand new toys. But this 6-year-old optimist climbed to the top of the pile of poop, dropped to his knees, and cheerfully started digging out scoop after scoop of manure with his bare hands. And the psychiatrist was dumbfounded, just asked, "What do you think you're doing?" And he's baffled. Here's what the little boy said with a smile. "With all this horse poop, there must be a pony in here somewhere." I like that little fable. Remember this. Your inward disposition will always determine your outward outlook. We cannot let what's happening around us affect what's living in us. I'm going to say that again because I want to make sure you got what I just said. We cannot let what's happening around us affect what's living in us. Look at this. What should your outlook be? 2 Corinthians. This guy Paul wrote it. They say they serve Christ. I know I sound like a madman. That's what he says. I've worked harder, been put in jail more often, been whipped times without number, and faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jews gave me 39 lashes. Now just stop right there, friends. Jesus was given 39 lashes once. This guy was given 39 lashes 5 times. 3 times it says I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I have lived with weariness and pain and sleepless nights. Often I've been hungry and thirsty and have gone without food. Often I've shivered with cold and without enough clothing to keep me warm. Can you imagine it? He doesn't have enough clothing to keep himself warm. He's left for dead. He's stoned. I mean, it's like amazing. And then look at the end of verse 31. He says, God, the Father of our Lord Jesus, who is to be praised forever. Get this. Here's a guy who, by all stretch of anyone's imagination, should have thrown in the towel, said, I've had enough. But he had an outlook on life that was always, there's something better yet to come. And so let me say it this way. When our outlook reflects his outlook, that's God's outlook, we're on our way to having true grit. So I want to tell you all, friends, your circumstances don't determine your destiny. They just reflect your current location, what you're doing or not doing at the moment. So it really comes down to our outlook. Success isn't determined by talent, money, education. Success is determined by grit. And so my prayer for you this day is that you will be a gritty person, one who has the ability to display terrier-like tenacity in your marriage, in your finances, in your parenting, in your friendships, one who has to demonstrate time and time again you have the ability to be a finisher. You don't stop midway through. One who will remember that you can actually control, you can exercise emotional control over negative emotions. They don't have to cause you to cave. And then last, you'll exhibit the ability to choose in the power of an optimistic outlook. Now, I fully realize there's some of you right now that you're on the precipice of wanting to end a marriage. Some of you feel like you really are at the end of it all because you don't have enough money. There's more month than money in your case. Some of you have had some friendships really go awry. They've betrayed you. They've talked smack about you. And you don't want to continue to even be a friend for someone else. So as we end our time here today, let me just pray. Let me just pray for you. Let's pray. God, I just pray right now for those who are listening to this message. My prayer would be that if there's a marriage that's hanging in the balance, that we'd give it another day. And then at the end of that day, God, I pray that we'd give it another day. And then another, and then another, and then another. Change us. And let that make a difference in how we live. God, for those of us who are struggling with finances, I pray that we'll begin, like Michelle said a few weeks ago, to live life well according to your word in the area of our finances. So we can have some for now and then some for later. God, I pray for those who just are struggling. Maybe they're struggling and wanting to quit as a parent or quit on their parents. Those who are praying, right? I want to pray for those now who are struggling in the realm of their job and wanting to throw in the towel. God, maybe we need to look at ourselves, not those around us. So God, my prayer would be that you just allow us to last another day. And then at the end of that day, change our outlook so that we can go another, so that we can ultimately leave a legacy, a big character called grit. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. He's worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. power and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you, there is none beside